Well, finally, it looks like a ceasefire in Syria is holding, which comes after at least 250 people were killed amidst claims from two different groups that they were being exterminated by the other. So today we're going to walk through what we know so far based off of a few news outlets and official statements from Syrian, Israeli, U.S., and Turkish leaders. Now, starting out with some reporting here from the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, they say Syria's government on Monday started evacuating Bedouin families trapped inside the southern city of Suwaida, where deadly fighting between Druze militiamen and Bedouin fighters has largely stopped as a ceasefire takes hold. And I think it's worth starting today's video with a look at the map to give folks an idea of where exactly it is we're talking about. Of course, the broader Middle East here, this is Live UA Map. It's a public resource. I'll have linked in the description if you want to use it yourself. Here in the middle of the screen, we have Syria. The yellow portion of the northeast is Kurdish-controlled territories. The green area is the rest of Syria, currently under the control, to a degree, of the al-Shara government. Something we're going to get into in the back half of today's video are the different allegations of the role or lack of a role that the Syrian government is playing in this violence. Now, what we're focused on today, and have been for about a week, is down here in the southern portion of Syria and the Suwaida government. And around the city of Suwaida, right here in the middle, is generally where a lot of these Bedouin tribes lived, and then you had a lot of Druze in Suwaida itself. That's the core of the fighting as of late. Notably, just north, we have Damascus, the Syrian capital. To the west of Damascus, Lebanon. West of Suwaida, the Golan Heights. And southwest of the Golan Heights, Israel. Israel did play a very active role in the opening days, kind of the middle days of this, conducting airstrikes against Syrian military targets, to include their Ministry of Defense in Damascus. That layered on some confusion, but there have also been cries from the Druze to the Israeli people to come and protect them from the extermination being carried out by the Bedouin. So it's a lot. Nonetheless, it does sound like Israel has stopped carrying out airstrikes against any targets in Syria for at least a couple days now. Now, moving back to an update on this ceasefire here, it does sound like around 250 people total lost their lives during the course of this fighting. That number may sound small right out the gate. Just if you've seen some of the footage, it's been graphic. It's been pretty nasty, all things considered. And we've certainly seen elderly, women, children that are caught up in the killing. Definitely some mutilated bodies appear to have been tortured and executed. So when you see that nature of violence, it makes that 250 number seem actually a little bit small. I think it's safe to say it's not 250 armed fighters on the two sides that lost their lives here. But nonetheless, based off all the different sources I'm seeing right now, that tends to be where they land after 4 or 5 days worth of fighting. Now, Syrian state media said the Syrian government had coordinated with officials in Suwaida to bring buses to evacuate some 1,500 Bedouins, and dozens of armed Bedouins, alongside other clans from around the country who came to support them, remained on the outskirts of Suwaida as government security force and military police were deployed on Sunday to oversee the exit from the entire province. And this was one of the many times in the last couple of days where it looked like this whole situation could just drastically spiral out of control. We saw Bedouin tribes that had been in conflict with each other, or at least had disagreements, lay down those disagreements to come together to move south to protect their brothers and sisters against the Druze. The numbers there are pretty flexible. I saw everything from 10, 15,000 all the way north of 50,000 total Bedouin fighters. There were reports of militias, is the best way to put this, tribal militias. There were reports that some in the Syrian army just took off their uniforms and joined their tribesmen moving south to fight the Druze. That looked like it was going to get really nasty really quickly. Fortunately, after a little bit of fighting, and there certainly was some, it looks like the ceasefire went into place. The Bedouins moved to the outskirts of Suwaida and are kind of setting up an outer cordon, if you will, which has not led to a reduction in tensions or nervousness from the two sides. In fact, we just got a statement from one of the Syrian leaders saying, we still need international help. You see what's about to happen any moment now. Now, a statement from one of the Bedouins here, a farmer, Ali al-Hawarin, said that he called the attacks by the Druze fighters unjustified and doubted that the Syrian government will be able to keep control. And that's a major issue when looking at this situation, again, is what role, if any, is the Syrian government playing here? The Britain-based war monitor, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, said that as part of this agreement that just went into effect, Bedouin fighters would have to release Druze women that they were holding captive and leave the province. It's not clear if they're asking those to leave the province that currently call the province home, or if they're just going after those that traveled down to Suwaida to fight back against the Druze. Now, Syria's Druze community has largely celebrated the fall of Assad since that came about, a little less than a year ago. But as soon as al-Shara stepped up into power, previously Jolani, now al-Shara, there's been a lot of speculation that he's not going to be, that he's still going to be relatively militant towards the Druze people. And one of the Druze leaders, al-Haraji, that we'll get into more here in a minute, has taken a pretty confrontational approach so far with al-Shara, whereas the majority of the Druze figures seem to be more focused on a unified Syria. And I think a lot of this boils down to just plain trust. Do you think that Jolani, now al-Shara, is a changed man and wants to see a unified Syria with equal rights across all sects and religions? Or do you see him as a wolf in sheep's clothing that as soon as he is given the moment will try to persecute and kill the Druze and other minorities, or at the very least turn a blind eye to allow it to happen? That's a major split driving the two divergent opinions here. Now, Syrian's President al-Shara has tried so far to appeal to the Druze community while criticizing some of these factions that are more loyal to Hikmat al-Haraj, who's been involved in the clashes so far. And notably, we have seen a couple different occasions, 2 or 3 different ceasefires that were announced. The Druze agreed to it, and then they had this one leader, Sheikh Hikmat al-Haraji, say, no, actually, we're not on board. Continue fighting, continue trying to kill any of the Bedouins or government forces that moved down. In taking a look at the split here within the Druze community, we've got 2 leaders we're looking to for some statements. The first here, Laith al-Balous, said, quote, "We're not taking sides. We're defending Suwaida's dignity and unity. We've tried to calm tensions, protect civilians, and push for dialogue, not violence. Despite threats, attacks, and even desecration of my father's grave, we didn't retaliate. We stood firm. We reject chaos and foreign agendas. We're for a united Syria, ruled by law, not blood. To Suwaida, we won't abandon you. To the world, act now. Don't just watch another tragedy unfold." So a lot of the focus there being on a unified Syria. Let's come together and make this Syrian project work. And it's similar statements that we saw from Balous last week as the fighting was kind of intensifying. He's been one of the leading voices helping to negotiate and agree to a couple of the different ceasefires. On the other side of the conversation here, Hikmat al-Hijri, I feel like I'm always mispronouncing that, another Druze leader, has been a little more confrontational, and you can kind of get that in his statement he just put out earlier today, where he said, quote, "We call on the free world and all of the active forces therein, and we direct our calls to His Eminence President Donald Trump, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and His Majesty King Abdullah II, and all who possess a force and influence in this world. Save al-Suwaida." He says, "For our people are being exterminated and being killed in cold blood. These are massacres being committed before the world's eyes, and the silence continues to kill. We call on the international community to bear its humanitarian and ethical responsibilities to stop these systematic and organized massacres. The mask has fallen from the face of this oppressive, tyrannical ruling gang. We also call on our Sunni people to take a clear stance towards what is happening to their Syrian brothers. We have never been enemies or adversaries, and we are no longer able to live with a regime that only knows how to rule by iron and fire and only knows how to exert authority through force and inflicting harm." And you're starting to see these lines start to separate. We have the Bedouins, the reason that we saw Bedouin tribes assemble from across the country and the fear that this was going to spark something even bigger were the allegations that Bedouins were being hunted down and exterminated by the Druze in Suwaida. And something I want to make clear is we have seen at this point video evidence of crimes, of war crimes, of illegal killings in, I think, every direction. We've seen government forces certainly involved with the mistreatment and execution of civilians. We've seen what appear to be Druze fighters executing Bedouins. We've seen Bedouins executing and mutilating Druze. So we're not going to go down the rabbit hole today of which one is worse. It does look like, big picture, there's a lot of pretty nasty violence in every direction. And as of now, fortunately, it looks like it has all stopped for now. Now, turning to some of the, but notably there, Haraji is pointing not just at the Bedouins, but at the Syrian government. You notice in a part of that saying the mask has fallen off of this tyrannical regime. He's not singling out the Bedouins. He's looking at al-Shara. Now, turning to some statements from neighboring countries here, Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday that Israel will continue to use military means to enforce its two red lines in Syria. And we've talked about this before. First, the demilitarization of the area south of Damascus. Second, the protection of the country's Druze minority. And we have seen a lot of calls from the Druze to people in Israel saying, we need you, come protect us. And some very passionate responses of people in Israel wanting to do what they can to stand up and make sure they're able to protect their Druze brothers and sisters. Netanyahu said the Damascus regime violated both of those red lines in recent days. Quote, it sent an army south of Damascus into the area that should be demilitarized, and it began to massacre the Druze. We could not accept this in any way. Now, this was, I misspoke a second ago, and I said this was a statement earlier today. This was a statement last week, and this was right amidst the Israeli strikes against targets in Syria. But it's important to note here kind of the red lines that Israel has drawn out as we look at what the response is and should be from the current al-Shara government. Turkey, their foreign minister, just put out a statement earlier today saying they consider any attempts to divide Syria a national security threat and would intervene. So again, we've got some segments within the Druze community talking about pushing back against the actual Syrian government. Turkey, for one, is saying, no. This needs to be a unified Turkey. We cannot have disparate groups taking over different portions of Syria. Tom Barak, the ambassador to Turkey, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey and a special envoy to Syria, told the Associated Press yesterday, quote, the killing, the revenge, the massacres on both sides are intolerable, but the current government in Syria has conducted themselves as best they can as a new government with very few resources to address the multiplicity of issues that arise in trying to bring a diverse society together. Regarding Israel's strikes on Syria, Barak said, quote, the United States was not asked, nor did they participate in that decision, nor was it the United States' responsibility in matters that Israel feels for its own self-defense. However, he said Israel's intervention creates another very confusing chapter and came at a very bad time. Now, an important piece here is the role of the Syrian government, because you are looking at sects and tribes and clans when you're getting into the Druze and the Bedouins. But we have a new Syrian government, and there's a lot of allegations flying in different directions. And it kind of varies between this is, on the one hand, you've got Hikmat al-Haraj claiming that this is directly the Syrian government trying to kill off the Druze people. All the way over to the other side, I would argue, is the suggestion, we don't know exactly where it sits, that the government wants to help, but that they cannot. And that is kind of where the U.S. ambassador Barak seems to sit in all of this based off his statements yesterday. Starting with one extreme and kind of moving to the other, the argument that this is all being directed by al-Shara, as in the government forces were moving south to massacre the Druze, which is why Israel put their red line in the sand, saying one of the reasons that there can be no military movement south of Damascus. So as those forces were moving south towards Suwaida a few days ago, al-Shara and the Syrian government said, we are going down to enforce peace. Israel looked at that and said, no, we can't risk any militarization along our border in that region. Also, we can't allow the Druze to be massacred. So Israel stepped in, started striking military assets. They were moving south. That kind of in some ways tied al-Shara's hands. This comes from the argument, the idea that al-Shara in this current government wants to massacre the Druze or any other Alawites on the West Coast or any others, comes from the idea that, or the argument that his past is unchanged, that he has past ties, of course, publicly known to Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and the Al-Nusra Front, all terrorist organizations with pretty violent track histories, to say the least. Supposedly, he became a changed man under HTS and did, to a degree, actually facilitate the targeting and killing of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State leaders. Nonetheless, there are a lot of folks, definitely some in Israel and definitely some in the United States, making the argument that really he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And given the opportunity, he's going to revert right back to his Al-Qaeda and Islamic State roots and start massacring as many minorities as he can. Some of the evidence to support this could be in the fact that we did see some Syrian government troops participating in the desecration of Druze religious sites, the killing of some clear civilians in the south. If that can be linked, not just that they were wearing the Syrian military uniforms, but that they were ordered by the Syrian government, it falls in this camp, that this killing, the attempted extermination of the Druze, is being done by the al-Shara government. This isn't known at this point. I want to stress that. The other end of the spectrum here, I would argue, is that the al-Shara government wants to, when I say I want to argue, it's where I feel like these two extremes kind of sit. Not that I necessarily fall in one camp or the other quite yet. The argument here is that the al-Shara government wanted to intervene. And they said they did in the opening day, saying, hey, we are sending military forces south to put a stop to this violence and enforce peace, but they can't. I find some validity in this because there's no doubt the Syrian state is generally weakened right now, and they do not have the ability to project power like even Assad did in some of his last days. Part of the challenge here for the Syrian government, if they did actually want to help in the south, was as soon as they hit the road, they started catching Israeli hellfires and bombs. And they had to stop, and they went back. And they really have not, in terms of the official military forces, been all that involved in Suwaida since it began. Then there's this middle ground that I would argue is somewhat indifferent, kind of a mix of the two, where al-Shara maybe is okay with the killing of the Druze. He's okay with moving them out, and he's fine to just kind of stand by. And if it's not going to be his actual forces carrying it out, maybe it's even better to let the Bedouins do the killing, and he can say, hey, I'm trying to stand up this government. I'm doing the best I can, kind of like Barak is saying, Ambassador Barak, saying, hey, the Syrian government's doing all they can. They're just not all that capable of stopping all this stuff. That's kind of a middle ground here that might be playing out as well. But nonetheless, I thought it was worth highlighting a couple different scenarios that could be what the Syrian government is trying to do, because as of now, we are still continuing to see claims and allegations that the Bedouins are exterminating the Druze, that the Syrian government is exterminating the Druze, and that the Druze are exterminating the Bedouins. It's probably intentionally messy in some way, shape, or form. But nonetheless, big picture, that's about where things sit right now as ceasefire is in place, and hopefully it continues to hold. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.